If you win this case, I will resign from the bench. When you lose, get out of military justice and go scrub toilets in the slums." Judge Sterling's mocking sneer slammed down into courtroom 7B like a fist against wet concrete. The old radiator pipes along the wall hissed with metallic heat. 300 spectators held their breath. At the adjacent table, my biological sister, my JAG superior, the woman who once shivered beside me on a freezing mattress in the South Side tenements, folded her expensive silk arms and coldly added, "Sign the dismissal, Laura. Your mayor brother-in-law only threw you in here as a sacrificial pawn." They gloated, waiting for me to break, spitting on the blood and tears of our janitor mother, who scrubbed midnight toilets for 30 years to raise us. Across the polished defense table, Leonard Washington, an innocent laborer shackled in chains for 22 years, stared at me with the hollowed eyes of a man who had forgotten what sunlight tasted like. My chest burned with the bitter taste of family betrayal, realizing my own flesh and blood had set me up for institutional slaughter. But if I retreated, my mother's lifetime of agony meant nothing. His lifetime in a concrete cage meant nothing. I calmly tightened my grip on my mother's worn fountain pen, the brass barrel still faintly stained with bleach from her cracked hands, stepped straight toward the bench and fired. "No continuance. But why is your signature sitting on the order suppressing alibi evidence from 22 years ago?" Sterling's smug smile vanished. His liver-spotted fingers froze around the gavel handle. His eyes locked onto mine in absolute abject terror. Before I tell you how that 22-year-old secret broke Chicago's ruling family, take a moment to like this video. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there, because what happened next on that courtroom floor changed everything. When the courtroom doors slammed shut behind the retreating bailiffs, the suffocating reality of my sister's betrayal settled into my bones. She had sat there publicly endorsing my professional execution to flatter her husband's administration. As for Judge Sterling, his unhinged screaming outburst on the record proved one thing he was terrified of: the truth coming out. I looked across the polished defense table at Leonard Washington, an innocent laborer shackled in chains for 22 years, and the burning ache in my chest transformed into cold military steel. I refused to be their sacrificial pawn. Daniel Hayes rose to open the oral arguments, exuding the smug entitlement of a corporate litigator accustomed to buying legal outcomes. Hayes sneered, pacing the jury box. "Washington's sentence was permanently sealed 22 years ago. All appellate windows are dead. You are a simple military lawyer handling barracks disputes, Hernandez. You lack the jurisdictional authority to challenge a sealed state criminal conviction in this court." When Hayes sank into his leather chair with a smirk aimed at the press, Judge Raymond Sterling tapped his gavel, turning his cold eyes toward my table. "Your turn, Counselor Hernandez. Let us see what your military education can accomplish in my courtroom." I rose from my chair, my polished dress shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Despite the violent rage simmering inside my ribcage, my facial muscles remained frozen in absolute military composure. I gripped my mother's worn brass fountain pen, the physical embodiment of 30 years of inhaling toxic bleach in midnight office buildings so I could attend law school. I bypassed the podium entirely, walking straight toward the center of the room. I engaged tactical breathing, inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4, locking my posture into the rigid stance of an intelligence officer. My eyes swept past my sister's expressionless face, locking directly onto the elevated bench where Sterling sat wrapped in his black judicial robes. Every reporter in the gallery leaned forward. "Your Honor." My voice rang out cold, resonant, slicing through the dead silence. "This case is not about reopening old wounds of the past. It is about exposing and correcting a brutal lie that has spanned more than 2 decades. I leveled my gaze at the bench, pointing my mother's pen toward the docket file. Leonard Washington, an innocent working-class laborer, spent 22 years suffocating in a dungeon because his alibi evidence was deliberately concealed from the defense and key witness testimony was systematically buried. Hayes sprang to his feet, turning bright red. "Objection, Your Honor. This is baseless slander." Before Hayes could launch into his rehearsed outrage, Sterling snapped, his voice cracking. "Sit down, Counselor Hayes." I raised an official county prosecution file high above my head, displaying the exact suppression document I had just interrogated him about. The city wants society to believe justice was served. But right here is the suppression order, bearing your exact signature. Judge Sterling burying the sworn witness affidavit that identified another armed suspect. A wave of shock swept across courtroom 7B, reporters whispering feverishly. Hayes scrambled up again, slamming his hand onto his table. Objection, that document was not properly filed in the county clerk's repository. I spun around, my voice cutting like a serrated blade. It was buried because someone sitting at the highest level of this city's justice system wanted it buried. I looked straight back up at the bench. In that single second, Raymond Sterling's arrogant mask shattered. I recognized the micro-expression from my intelligence interrogations, not judicial anger, but paralyzing, abject terror. He slammed his gavel with enough force to echo off the plaster ceilings. This court stands adjourned until tomorrow morning to review new evidence. Sterling fled into his private chambers without another word. Back in our auxiliary JAG workspace, my senior mentor Benjamin Carter closed the heavy privacy blinds, looking at me with a sharp tactical nod. Sterling didn't challenge you because he thinks you are weak. He humiliated you because he is terrified of the prospect that you can win and expose his crimes. I refused to leave the federal building. Benjamin and I locked ourselves inside the workspace, scanning decades-old archival boxes, while my adrenaline still surged. Benjamin pulled the blinds shut, his voice dropping. Did you catch Sterling's reaction when you raised that affidavit? I sorted through Cook County criminal logs from 22 years ago. He panicked. An arrogant federal judge doesn't run from a standard appellate motion. Benjamin slid a dust-covered binder across the desk, tapping the faded spine. Exactly. Because that document wasn't supposed to exist on this earth. Someone ordered it destroyed 22 years ago. I used my federal Joint Task Force credentials to bypass the county firewall and pull these prosecution logs before the wolves realized what we were hunting. You have until dawn. If Sterling was the one who forced Washington's sentence years ago, then this trial is no longer a simple legal dispute. It is a war to overthrow a machine that he built to protect. For 4 continuous hours in the dead of night following my explosive courtroom confrontation, I sifted through yellowed interrogation notes. I had already exposed Sterling's signature on the suppression order, but I needed the motive. At exactly 10:00 p.m., my finger stopped on a classified dispatch memo. I leaned into the desk lamp, examining the routing block. It linked Sterling directly to Mayor Holloway's office. My blood ran cold. Sterling hadn't acted alone 22 years ago. He was covering up a wrongful conviction explicitly ordered and funded by City Hall. I turned the page, uncovering internal memos proving his absolute oversight of the framing. Every procedural roadblock he had thrown at me was not judicial rigor. It was desperate, self-serving concealment. At midnight, sharp stilettos clicked down the linoleum hallway. The office door swung open without a knock. My biological sister Elena stepped in, wearing a bespoke Italian suit, her eyes devoid of familial warmth. The expensive French perfume she wore clashed violently with the smell of old paper and dust. "What crazy stunt are you pulling, Laura?" Elena demanded, marching toward my desk. "I didn't stay up until midnight for a congratulatory visit," I replied without looking up, keeping my hands flat on the open folder. Elena slammed her leather-gloved palm down onto my files. "I am here to save you from a catastrophe. You are attacking a sitting federal judge, and worse, you are interfering with the financial and political interests of this city. Your brother-in-law is entering a critical re-election cycle. Digging up the Washington case right now is a knife in the back of this family." I kicked my chair back, rising to my full height. "Family? What family are you talking about, Elena? The Hernandez family of a janitor mother who worked until her hands bled to feed us, or the aristocratic syndicate drowning in your husband's corruption?" Elena sneered, her voice turning venomous. "Don't bring Mom into this. Mom lived a poor, pathetic life because she didn't know how to survive in this world. Richard gave us status, prestige, a place among the elite. You are a JAG lawyer. You must understand discipline and subordination. Bury this file, take a quiet settlement, and swallow your pride to protect my career." I looked at the sister who used to shiver next to me in our Southside tenement. "An innocent man lost 22 years of his life in a dungeon because of your husband's political greed." I delivered each word like a sniper's bullet. And you, carrying Hernandez's blood, choose to kneel and protect that crime. I will never stop. And if you stand in the way of justice, I will expose you too. Elena turned her back, leaving a freezing threat. You will regret this naivety, Laura. When the door clicked shut, Benjamin stepped out from the shadow of the bookstacks. I looked at him, my resolve turned to steel. This war isn't about a single case anymore, Benjamin. We are taking down the whole machine, even if it carries my own blood. When the courtroom doors opened on the morning of our second hearing, courtroom 7B was packed to suffocating capacity. Hundreds of journalists, legal scholars, and military observers crammed into the wooden benches. Sterling emerged from his chambers, his face tight with extreme vigilance, his eyes locked onto mine, burning with unadulterated hatred. As Daniel Hayes stood demanding immediate sanctions for disrupting legal order, I stepped into the center, well gripping the thick stack of Cook County personnel records, my voice hitting the room like artillery fire. Your Honor, the defense submits no fabrications. We speak the exact language of official county prosecution records, and those records prove that this court has been operating under an illegal, undisclosed conflict of interest from the very first minute of these proceedings. I raised the certified personnel logs high in the air, projecting my voice to the back row of the gallery so every citizen and journalist could hear. The defense formally submits into evidence the personnel rosters and investigation orders from 22 years ago, establishing an undeniable fact. Judge Raymond Sterling, the man presiding over this court, was the lead assistant district attorney who prosecuted and convicted Leonard Washington. The room exploded into absolute chaos. Flashbulbs blinded the room as reporters shouted over the wooden barrier. Daniel Hayes leaped up, his face white as chalk, screaming, "Objection! Vigorous objection! Counsel is publicly slandering the court's authority." Sterling pounded his gavel with frantic rhythmic fury, his elderly face turning purple with rage. "Order, I command order. You are crossing into the most severe territory of criminal contempt. Counselor Hernandez." I stood like a concrete bunker in the center, well refusing to yield an inch of ground. With the highest respect for the law, Your Honor, the defense declares that a sitting judge has an absolute moral and legal duty to recuse himself from any trial where he previously served as the direct lead prosecutor. If the dignity of this courtroom is built on burying the truth and imprisoning innocent men for 22 years, then that dignity deserves to be smashed to pieces. Sterling roared, pointing his gavel. "Sit down immediately." "No, Your Honor," I shouted back. Sterling leaned over the bench, his eyes bulging. "You dare challenge my integrity in this public room?" I held his gaze without blinking. "I am placing onto the permanent record before the entire American public that this court is concealing the most disgraceful conflict of interest in judicial history." Sterling screamed at the armed bailiff. "Officer, handcuff her. Remove her immediately for contempt." The bailiff lunged toward my table, the sharp metallic snap of his steel cuffs unhooking from his belt, echoing through the room. At that fraction of a second, Benjamin Carter shot up, slamming his briefcases down, his voice booming. "Your Honor, if you order counsel handcuffed for placing a lawful conflict of interest onto the record, I will personally deliver this transcript and JAG intelligence file to the Federal Judicial Review Board before noon today." Benjamin's threat hit Sterling's fatal nerve. The judge froze his gavel, trembling, and weakly waved the bailiff back. Sterling declared a 1-hour recess and fled the bench. As Benjamin and I entered an empty conference room, my military device buzzed. An urgent email marked with the red seal of JAG Superior Command flashed across my screen. My heart stopped. My biological sister Elena had officially signed an executive order terminating my defense authority in the Washington case, citing an ongoing internal investigation into severe breaches of military legal ethics. My own sister had pulled the trigger, stripped my military weapons right as I cornered our enemy, all to protect her husband's empire. Benjamin gripped my shoulder, his eyes burning. "Turn that pain and betrayal into a fire of destruction, Laura. Elena can use her command authority to remove you from the JAG agency roster, but she can never have the power to strip a civilian citizen of their right to choose their personal attorney." We sprinted to the holding cells. I stood before Leonard Washington, looking him in the eye. My sister just used her executive authority to strip my JAG clearance. I no longer officially represent you. The graying laborer did not hesitate. He took my mother's pen and signed a formal retainer agreement and notice of appearance, retaining me as his independent private pro bono attorney. You are the only person who ever dared to fight for a poor convict like me, Laura. I entrust my life to you. When court resumed, I strode back to the defense table. Sterling and Hayes stared in abject horror as they realized Elena's assassination order had completely failed. When the afternoon session commenced, Sterling completely dropped his mask of judicial neutrality. He transformed his courtroom into a procedural slaughterhouse. For 4 grueling hours, he established a tyrannical regime of evidentiary suppression. Every question I posed, Daniel Hayes leaped up with rehearsed objections. Objection argumentative, objection lacks foundation, objection outside the scope of remand. Without hesitation, Sterling's gavel slammed down. Sustained. Strike counsel's motion from the record. I stood at the podium gripping the edges until my fingers went numb, watching a corrupt judge systematically strip away every piece of paper that could save an innocent man's life. Every time I opened my mouth, the crack of wood against mahogany hammered into my eardrums. For 4 hours of procedural waterboarding, I was permitted to enter less than 1/3 of our documentation. The gallery grumbled as veteran reporters shook their heads at the naked bias. Hayes leaned back, flashing an arrogant smirk. When court adjourned, I walked into the corridor, my temples throbbing. Benjamin pulled me into a quiet alcove. Do you see his dirty game? Sterling is bleeding you dry according to legal procedure. He wants to frustrate you to the point where you make a fatal procedural error, giving him the pretext to dismiss this case permanently before you can file an appeal. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall. I can't finish a single sentence in there. What is our move? Benjamin's eyes sharpened. If he has locked the courtroom doors with his judicial gavel, then we stop chasing him inside it. Change tactics, bypass the judge, and strike directly at the witnesses he gagged 22 years ago. I refused all rest that evening. Benjamin and I cross-referenced every patrolman, detective, and investigator on the original crime scene logs. Most were dead, relocated, or sitting on lucrative pensions funded by my brother-in-law's administration. Then my finger stopped on a name circled in red ink: Detective Marcus Donovan. He had legally changed his last name from Holloway to Donovan to avoid association with his cousin, Mayor Holloway. He was the original lead homicide investigator, now retired in the western suburbs. I drove 40 minutes alone across pitch-black highways, pulling up to a decaying brick bungalow illuminated by a single porch light. I knocked heavily on the rotting doorframe. Several suffocating minutes passed before the heavy door creaked open 2 inches. An elderly man with thick white hair and paranoid eyes peered through the chain lock. "Detective Donovan?" I asked. "I'm retired. I don't talk to reporters." Donovan growled, attempting to slam the door shut. I jammed my dress shoe into the gap and threw my shoulder against the frame. "I am Laura Hernandez, Leonard Washington's defense attorney. Please, detective. I just need 5 minutes. You were the first officer at the scene 22 years ago. You know there was an alibi affidavit buried. Or did Raymond Sterling blindfold you just like he did this entire city?" The name hit the old cop like a physical blow. He froze, trembling, his eyes darting toward the empty street. He unchained the door, pulling me inside a dark living room reeking of stale tobacco. Slumping into a torn leather chair, Donovan buried his face in his calloused hands. "You don't know what kind of monster you are fighting, Laura." Yes. 22 years ago, exactly 3 days before trial, an eyewitness came into the precinct identifying a different armed man fleeing the alley. Not Washington. I wrote that affidavit myself. I leaned forward. Why did it vanish? Donovan looked up, bloodshot eyes. Because that same night, Raymond Sterling, then assistant DA, stormed into my precinct. He seized my original investigative binder and ordered me to erase the witness. When I refused, he leaned into my ear and threatened to strip my badge, cancel my pension, and frame me for federal bribery if I spoke a word. I had 3 kids to feed. I stayed silent while an innocent man rotted for 2 decades. Only one other prosecutor knew: Elaine Sullivan, his former junior prosecutor, who now lives out in Naperville. When I returned to my modest Southside apartment the following noon, a scene of utter destruction shattered my exhaustion. My reinforced wooden front door hung splintered on a single twisted hinge, the deadbolt drilled out with professional tactical precision. I drew my heavy flashlight, stepping silently over the shattered threshold. My home had been systematically ransacked by hired operatives, sofa cushions slashed open with combat blades, bookshelves overturned, hardwood floorboards pried apart with crowbars. I sprinted toward my study desk, the secure repository where I stored our investigation copies. Every binder was gone. My backup hard drive, witness contact logs, even my mother's old ink cartridges had been stripped clean from the drawers. Sitting on the bare, scratched mahogany desk was a single sheet of heavy white cardstock printed without headers or fingerprints. Drop the case while you still can. They were not just fighting in court anymore. They had violated my private sanctuary to send a lethal message. My hands clenched around the printed threat until my knuckles turned white. The icy grip of fear evaporated, entirely replaced by volcanic military rage. City Hall had discarded the rule of law, deploying hired mercenaries to terrorize an active JAG officer in her home. When Benjamin arrived, he surveyed the wreckage with grim tactical gravity. "They are escalating to extreme measures, Laura. You don't hire professional thugs to raid a home over weak civil claims. This violent act proves one thing: you hit their fatal nerve. They are genuinely terrified." I looked at Benjamin, my voice turning cold as ice. "If they want to play jungle law, we strike at a speed their hitmen can't track." The next morning, we executed a secret off-the-record deposition for Detective Marcus Donovan in an anonymous commercial basement across town. To prevent municipal leaks, we hired Sarah Jenkins, an independent, incorruptible civilian stenographer with zero ties to City Hall. Trembling with paranoia, Donovan raised his right hand and went on the record swearing under oath that Raymond Sterling had blackmailed him to destroy the alibi evidence 22 years ago. The moment Donovan signed the deposition transcript and stepped onto the sidewalk, disaster struck. A black, unmarked SUV with tinted windows screeched to the curb. Two massive operators in tactical black suits blocked his path. The shorter one leaned into Donovan's ear, his whisper slicing through the cold air. "Your 7-year-old granddaughter takes the Route 4 school bus every morning at 7:15 a.m. It would be a tragedy if she never made it to class." Donovan turned white as death. He bolted back inside, shaking violently. "They know everything. They know what I just testified to. I'm out. I recant my entire statement. I won't let them murder my family." Despite my desperate pleas to his honor as a cop, Donovan shoved past me, fleeing the building in blind terror. I stood frozen in the silent basement, turning to Benjamin and Sarah, an icy revelation creeping down my spine. This location was classified. Only 3 people on Earth knew this address today. I stared at Sarah Jenkins. The young stenographer burst into tears, raising her hands to swear she had not sent a single text. In that suffocating silence, the final brutal puzzle piece clicked into place. I looked at Benjamin, my voice breaking with grief and rage. It wasn't Sarah. It was Elena, my biological sister. During our midnight argument at the JAG office, I had left my scheduling pad exposed on my desk. Elena Hernandez Holloway, my own sister, was the internal spy. She had passed my secret deposition schedule directly to her husband's syndicate, so they could dispatch hitmen to intimidate our witness. The sheer trauma of my sister's espionage transformed into unyielding kinetic energy. I refused to let my bloodline's betrayal halt our mission. That afternoon, Benjamin and I broke speed limits to the western suburbs, forcefully intercepting former Assistant DA Elaine Sullivan on her manicured Naperville porch. When she panicked and reached for her phone to call police, I cornered her against the brick facade. "Do you know my mother scrubbed office toilets at midnight for 30 years to educate 2 daughters? Do you know what it feels like to watch her eldest daughter, my own sister, betray the truth? Sell out her own blood and kneel before corrupt politicians just to protect her executive chair. For 22 years, Leonard Washington rotted in a dungeon because educated lawyers like you chose silence to protect your own skins. You don't have the right to be a coward anymore." Elaine. The raw, undeniable truth of my words broke Sullivan completely. Weeping openly on her porch, she collapsed against the railing, her voice trembling in direct confession. "I tried to stop Sterling 22 years ago, Laura, but I was terrified of his political syndicate. To protect my own life, I secretly copied Sterling's entire bribery ledger and suppression orders and hid them in a commercial storage facility in the industrial suburbs. My insurance policy if they ever tried to make me their scapegoat." She scribbled the storage facility address on a tear-stained receipt and pressed it into my palm. "If you think my biological sister crossed the ultimate line by leaking my secret investigation to City Hall hitmen, type the word betrayal in the comments right now. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because I am about to take you inside Storage Facility 314 and show you exactly what we uncovered in Judge Sterling's secret bribery ledger." In the dead of night following Sullivan's confession, Benjamin Carter and I, dressed in dark tactical gear, driving a military-plated SUV into the industrial wasteland of Outer Cook County. Using the anonymous access keys Sullivan had guarded for 2 decades, we unlocked the rusting padlock of Storage Unit 314. Under the sharp, narrow beams of our tactical flashlights, a massive, unheated warehouse materialized, choked with thick dust and towering steel shelves. Hundreds of sealed cardboard banker's boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling, labeled with numerical case codes spanning 20 years of municipal litigation. Raymond Sterling had not just hidden evidence from one wrongful conviction. He had built a subterranean fortress containing the shadow archives of Chicago's political underworld, detailed ledgers recording judicial bribery, real estate graft, and campaign laundering for the entire Holloway administration. I moved rapidly down the central aisle, scanning case numbers with military precision, knowing that City Hall's surveillance net was already tightening around our coordinates. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete, slicing open the heavy box labeled Washington Homicide Restricted with my military utility knife. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out a dark green leather-bound ledger, the official working diary of Assistant DA Raymond Sterling from the exact year Leonard Washington was framed. I shined my flashlight onto the yellowed pages, reading Sterling's meticulous handwritten entries that documented a systemic, multi-decade conspiracy. Received direct instructions from Thomas Bradley, Deputy Mayor. Pressure from Mayor Richard Holloway's office is absolute. Must secure a rapid guilty verdict before the autumn election cycle to reinforce the iron fist on crime platform. Alibi witness testimony at the scene suppressed per instruction. I flipped the page and my breath caught in my throat as another entry hit my eyes like a physical stab wound. Met with Elena Hernandez, then junior intern at Defense Office. Holloway's fiancée, Elena, agreed to leak internal defense strategies and bury incoming alibi correspondence to protect Holloway's political standing. Compensated via legal consulting trust. My own sister, Elena, had not just been corrupted later in life as a high-ranking manager. She had signed a devil's pact to sell out an innocent Southside citizen at the very start of her career, trading a laborer's freedom for her elite marriage into the Holloway dynasty. Before I could process the grief, the roar of a high-octane engine echoed outside. Blinding headlights slashed through the gaps of the metal door. "Kill your light down," Benjamin hissed, shoving me behind a stack of boxes. The external lock exploded as suppressed gunshots shattered the metal latch. 2 figures in black tactical gear stepped into the gloom, leveling submachine guns. "Sweep every row, City Hall orders, leave no witnesses alive, burn every box to ash," the lead operator barked. They advanced rapidly, firing bursts into the dark. I clutched the green ledger against my chest as bullets shredded the boxes 2 feet above our heads, filling the air with pulverized paper and acrid cordite. "Run, Laura, move!" Benjamin roared, hurling a heavy steel folding chair across the aisle to draw their muzzle flashes while dragging me toward the narrow rear fire exit. Deafening automatic fire erupted, rounds shredding the stacks around us. A stray round sliced through the shoulder of my jagged trench coat, drawing a hot, stinging line of blood across my skin, but I did not slow my stride for a microsecond. Benjamin hit the emergency exit door with his full body weight, throwing us out onto the gravel parking lot just as the operators rounded the corner, firing wildly into the night. We dived into Benjamin's armored SUV as bullets shattered our rearview mirror. Benjamin slammed the throttle to the floor, launching onto the industrial access road as the syndicate's black sedan pursued at highway speeds. A terrifying vehicular duel played out across abandoned suburban roads. Relying on his combat driving experience, Benjamin executed a violent tactical turn across a narrow single-lane bridge just as a blaring freight train roared past, clipping the pursuit vehicle's fender and permanently severing their pursuit. Once safe inside Benjamin's secure downtown residence, I taped a gauze bandage over my bleeding shoulder. My military phone buzzed with an unknown number. I engaged the speakerphone. The freezing robotic voice of Evelyn Sinclair, personal assistant to billionaire Maxwell Vance, chilled the room. "You shouldn't have touched that storage unit, Counselor Hernandez. You and your senior mentor just signed your own death warrants. You have until morning court session to deliver that ledger to City Hall lobby. If not, your janitor mother and your client in his cell will pay the fatal price." The line went dead. I stood up, staring at my bloody reflection in the window with cold, unshakable focus. I placed the green ledger on the table, turning to Benjamin. "We stop playing defense tonight. Tomorrow morning we bring war into courtroom 7B. When court reconvened the following morning, courtroom 7B was packed to explosive capacity, the air thick with tension. Media crews from every national network lined the walls, their camera lenses locked onto the defense table. When Judge Sterling emerged in his silk robes and ascended the bench, his cold eyes swept the room and collided with my steady, unblinking military gaze. Seeing me standing erect in uniform, holding the green leather-bound ledger despite the assassination threat, Sterling's face drained of all color. He realized I had survived the Midnight Kill team and possessed his fatal records. "Proceed, Counselor Hernandez." Sterling croaked, his voice dry and trembling. I strode straight into the well, raising the green ledger high above my head, my voice ringing through the room. "Your Honor, before we resume appellate arguments, the defense formally enters into the record the original prosecutorial ledger, suppression orders, and bribery logs of Assistant District Attorney Raymond Sterling, evidence establishing that Sterling conspired with City Hall to bury alibi evidence and imprison Leonard Washington for 22 years. The courtroom erupted into an absolute sonic boom of shouts, gasps, and frantic camera shutters. Daniel Hayes screamed objections, his arms flailing wildly. Sterling pounded his gavel with erratic desperation, his elderly face pale as death. "Order, I command order. Where did you procure those illegal fabricated documents, Counselor Hernandez? They are inadmissible." I stepped up to the edge of the mahogany bench, pointing my finger directly at his chest. "From the secret storage fortress you built to protect your own cowardice for 2 decades. This is not a baseless slander. This is ironclad documentary proof of constitutional kidnapping and judicial bribery." Before Sterling could order his bailiffs to seize me, the heavy double doors at the rear swung open. A tactical team of FBI special agents from the Public Integrity Section, flanked by 2 armed United States Marshals, marched down the center aisle with clinical authority. The lead investigator projected his voice over the chaos, flashing a federal warrant. "Judge Raymond Sterling, you are under arrest for judicial bribery, obstruction of justice, and civil rights deprivation. Step away from the bench and surrender your hands." The gallery disintegrated as journalists scrambled for the exits. Sterling stood paralyzed, his gavel slipping from his trembling hand. The U.S. Marshals flanked him, stripping him of his gavel and escorting him off the elevated bench he had ruled like a tyrant. As he passed my table, his eyes burned with venom. "You will burn in hell for this, Laura." That afternoon, an emergency visiting federal judge reviewed the green ledger, slamming his gavel down to vacate the conviction entirely. Leonard Washington was declared a free man after 22 years. He collapsed onto the defense table, sobbing uncontrollably into Benjamin's arms. Our historic, euphoric victory lasted less than 30 minutes before another blood-soaked reality shattered our peace. While packing my litigation brief in the corridor, my phone rang. The terrified, gasping voice of Elaine Sullivan echoed amid shattering glass. "Laura, help me. They came to the motel. They found me room 208, Motel Route 34. Please." A wet, sickening thud of a blade piercing flesh resonated over the line, followed by a heavy fall and dead silence. Benjamin and I sprinted to his vehicle, driving at maximum speed toward the decaying motel Route 34. The door to room 208 stood ajar, bloody handprints smearing the doorframe. Benjamin breached the room. Sullivan lay pooled in her own dark blood on the stained carpet, suffering multiple severe puncture wounds from a combat blade. Benjamin pressed a towel against her artery, his voice tight. "She's barely pulsing. Call an ambulance immediately." I dropped to my knees in the blood, lifting Elaine's head onto my lap as sirens echoed in the distance. The dying former prosecutor opened her clouded eyes, her blood-slicked fingers gripping my uniform sleeve. She gasped out her final words in a faint, rattling whisper. "Laura, they took the files at the warehouse. But not all of them. Sterling has a secret vault. Safe deposit box 117, First National Bank, downtown Chicago. Get it. Before they..." Elaine lost consciousness in my arms just as paramedics swarmed the room. We spent the entire night outside the surgical ICU until doctors confirmed she survived. Early the next morning, wearing the same uniform crusted with Elaine's dried brown blood, Benjamin and I walked straight into the marble lobby of First National Bank. Accompanied by federal investigators executing an emergency federal search warrant and asset seizure order, we presented our credentials to bank manager Michael Brown, who escorted us to the armored vault. When Box 117 was breached by federal agents, we uncovered the ultimate trove: stacks of offshore bank drafts and an encrypted hard drive labeled Washington Systemic City Hall Insurance. The drive revealed thousands of internal communications between Deputy Mayor Bradley and Sterling, ordering the framing alongside detailed spreadsheets mapping monthly bribe transfers from shell corporations into the offshore accounts of Chicago judges, police commanders, and politicians. My phone rang. A distorted voice hissed through the speaker. $5 million wired to any offshore account you choose. Just burn that drive. I let out a freezing laugh. Tell my brother-in-law to start sizing his prison uniform. I hung up, turning to Benjamin. We take this straight to the FBI. We delivered the encrypted hard drive directly to the Chicago field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent David Miller, a veteran anti-corruption investigator, reviewed the deputy mayor's emails and offshore payment trails. Miller's jaw tightened as he locked the drive into an evidence safe. "You haven't just found a dirty judge. This is an organized criminal syndicate. Maintain absolute operational silence for 48 hours while I secure multi-agency arrest warrants." We returned to our JAG quarters, waiting in suffocating silence, believing institutional justice was finally about to cleanse the city. At dawn 2 days later, Benjamin burst into my office, his face gray as ash, slamming the morning edition of the Chicago Tribune onto my desk. The bold front-page headline made my blood run cold. Department of Justice Regional Office announces preliminary findings on Courtroom 7B investigation into former Judge Raymond Sterling, limited to procedural oversight errors. Mayor Richard Holloway and Deputy Mayor Thomas Bradley officially cleared of all systemic allegations. I read the article in horror, a high-ranking political appointee within the regional DOJ oversight office. The internal leaker had been bought off by the syndicate. They had bypassed Special Agent Miller, squashed the federal warrants, and whitewashed the entire conspiracy, reducing a multi-decade municipal bribery ring to a minor procedural mistake by a single, rogue judge. I slammed my fist into the mahogany desk, knocking over stacks of law books. If even the highest federal oversight bodies can be purchased and bent by their dollars, then we will use the one weapon every political operator fears. We will take this truth directly to the court of public opinion. That night, Benjamin and I walked onto the set of Chicago's highest-rated primetime investigative broadcast, hosted by veteran journalist Robert Collins. When the red tally light flashed live to millions of viewers across America, I held up the encrypted hard drive and Sterling's bribery ledgers to the close-up camera, detonating an evidentiary bomb. Judge Raymond Sterling never acted alone. The framing of Leonard Washington 22 years ago was not an isolated judicial error. I hold the documentary proof of a systematic, organized corruption ring directed by Deputy Mayor Thomas Bradley and protected by my own brother-in-law, Mayor Richard Holloway. They bought off regional oversight to bury the truth. The moment the live broadcast terminated, Chicago erupted into a political earthquake. Within an hour, thousands of working-class citizens from the Southside University students and legal activists flooded the streets marching on City Hall with signs demanding the mayor's immediate arrest. Facing a national media firestorm, Mayor Richard Holloway called an emergency press conference in the municipal briefing room, standing before a forest of microphones in his tailored Italian suit. The political fox sweated under the studio lights as he weaponized family psychology to destroy my credibility before the nation. I am deeply saddened by the actions of my sister-in-law Laura Hernandez. Driven by reckless ambition and a desperate need for professional attention, she has betrayed this family's honor, launching paranoid, fabricated attacks against this administration. A junior JAG lawyer has confused her own paranoid fantasies with legal reality. Holloway smiled condescendingly at the cameras, still arrogant enough to believe municipal power could eclipse the sun, even as protesters hammered on the glass doors outside. Shortly before midnight, I left the television studio alone, driving my personal civilian sedan along the dark, unlit stretch of Highway Route 41 skirting Lake Michigan. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I noticed a massive black V8 pickup truck running without headlights, tracking my speed with predatory precision. I accelerated through a sharp curve, but the truck's engine roared, surging forward. Its high-beam halogen lights blinded my cabin, the V8 engine screaming as it accelerated past 100 miles per hour and intentionally violently rammed the rear of my sedan. The massive kinetic impact lifted my vehicle off the asphalt, sending me spinning out of control across the lanes before smashing with catastrophic force into the concrete center divider. Steel crumpled with a deafening blast, safety glass shattering into thousands of razor-sharp fragments that shredded my face and forehead. The airbag detonated, slamming my head into the steering column as hot blood poured into my eyes, soaking the collar of my uniform. The black pickup screeched its brakes, reversing into the darkness before any passing motorists could capture its plates. When emergency sirens wailed 15 minutes later and paramedics loaded my battered, bleeding body onto a stretcher, Benjamin Carter, having tracked my vehicle's military GPS emergency beacon, braked his vehicle at the perimeter, sprinting through the wreckage to grip my blood-soaked hand, weeping openly. Looking at him through a haze of pain and blood, I slowly formed a defiant, blood-stained smile. "Benjamin, don't cry. That wasn't an accident. They tried to murder me tonight. Because they know we have driven them against their final wall." At dawn, I signed myself out against medical advice. Clad in a spare uniform, Benjamin retrieved my ribs tightly taped and a heavy bandage wrapped around my sutured brow. I limped alongside him into a classified federal command center. The assassination attempt had transformed me into a national symbol. The U.S. Attorney General intervened directly, dispatching an independent special prosecutor and NCIS teams. That evening, the largest anti-corruption raid in modern legal history commenced. Federal teams stormed City Hall, seizing hard drives. 2 judges were arrested at their residences. Deputy Mayor Bradley was tackled fleeing with a forged passport. FBI Special Agent Miller breached the penthouse of Mayor Holloway. Live on national television, Holloway was led out in steel handcuffs. Walking behind him, head bowed in humiliation, was my biological sister Elena, arrested for espionage and obstructing federal justice. I stood before the monitors, watching my own sister led into a federal transport van. My eyes burned, but I did not shed a single tear. My secure phone vibrated with a disposable burner number. Sterling's raspy voice hissed, "You really think handcuffing Holloway means you won, Laura? Come to the abandoned Riverfront County Annex. Come alone if you want to know who actually owns this city." I drove alone to the decaying courthouse beside the Chicago River. Sterling stood in the shadows without his robes, resembling a cornered wolf. "You don't understand the structure of power in this world, Laura," Sterling spat. "Men like Holloway and Elena are just political puppets who come and go with election cycles. The justice system. Men like me build the corridors of power to keep society from collapsing. You think your slum on the South Side survives a week without our iron hands throwing the trash into dungeons?" I walked straight up to the rotting defense table. "You don't preserve order, Sterling. You use the law as a weapon to protect the privileges of your class people, who think power belongs to them by birthright. I am not a docile sheep. I am the one who smashed your machine to pieces." Sterling tossed a sealed brown envelope onto the dusty table, his voice bitter with revenge. "Vance cut us loose to save his own empire. If I go down, his syndicate goes with me. For you, when you realize who pays for my bench. Federal agents burst in to take him into custody. Inside the envelope, offshore wire records, culminating in a single name circled in red: Maxwell Vance, the Midwest billionaire who owned the private prison networks. That night, Evelyn Sinclair texted an invitation to the top floor of Vance Tower. Billionaire Maxwell Vance, silver-haired and distinguished, sat behind a burl walnut desk, calmly pouring 2 glasses of Bordeaux. Politicians and judges are replaceable tools, Counselor Hernandez. But finance and prisons, that is the permanent infrastructure of this nation. He slid an executive contract across an offer for his corporate board with a $5 million salary. Why waste your military legal talent being an angry, impoverished reformer? Drop the investigation, walk through that door, and join the actual ruling class. My voice was freezing cold. Keep your dirty money, Vance. His smile vanished. He slid a black folder across the desk, surveillance photographs of my mother shopping alone, Benjamin leaving his residence, Leonard, Washington, with his grandchildren. This is my final generosity, Laura. If you do not resign tomorrow and halt the asset tracking, the people in these photos will suffer fatal accidents. I looked straight into his eyes, a triumphant smile spreading across my bruised face. You just made the most fatal, stupid mistake of your business career tonight, Maxwell Vance. I tapped the collar of my military uniform, revealing a concealed digital wire transmitting live to FBI Special Agent Miller's tactical command downstairs. You were so arrogant that you just broadcasted a federal crime, bribery, witness intimidation, and extortion live to federal law enforcement. Vance's face froze, turning pale. I strode toward the elevator, delivering one final blow. Raymond Sterling and my brother-in-law thought they were untouchable too. The following noon, tactical teams stormed Vance Tower, leading the billionaire out in steel handcuffs before the national financial press. 3 weeks later, I walked back into courtroom 7B. As I pushed through the swinging doors, the entire gallery, the new visiting judge, senior, litigators, clerks, and hundreds of reporters simultaneously rose to their feet in absolute silence, bowing their heads in deep professional respect. 2 months later, I stood in the Southside neighborhood where I was raised beneath a brand new brass sign, Hernandez Justice Center. A reporter shoved a microphone toward my face. Counselor Hernandez, why reject a $5 million corporate partnership to open a free clinic here in the slums? I looked at my mother, Maria Hernandez, wiping tears of pride, and at Leonard, Washington, smiling in freedom, because the working-class people of this neighborhood believed in me before any government or institution ever did. Growing up in poverty on these streets taught me one enduring truth. Justice is meaningless if it is a luxury reserved only for the wealthy. On a cold winter evening outside the clinic, Benjamin joined me under the street lamps. Do you ever think back to that first morning in courtroom 7B when Sterling humiliated you? Benjamin asked softly. I smiled, feeling the crisp night air against my healed sutures. Sometimes. Benjamin tucked his hands into his trench coat. He genuinely believed his aristocratic power could crush you without effort. But he and his corrupt machine inadvertently forged the one soldier with enough resilience and integrity to destroy them. I looked toward the illuminated domes of the federal courthouse, silently reaffirming my eternal oath. Power is always blindly convinced it will rule and manipulate forever, until the truth walks into the room and learns how to fight. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. If you loved watching this corrupt Chicago political dynasty get handcuffed and stripped of their power, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates righteous karma. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which moment of their downfall was your absolute favorite. I will be reading them all.